Good afternoon. I'm Jonathan Miller. I am the General Counsel for the U.S. Hemp Roundtable. The U.S. Hemp Roundtable is the hemp industry's national business advocacy organization, and we represent hemp companies and CBD companies from across the hemp food chain, and are also all of the major grassroots organizations in the hemp industry. Our group strongly endorses HR 841, which we're going to discuss with you today. We have an all-star cast of folks that are joining us. We have Kyle Truesdale, who is the CEO of the Agrarian Group, a farming company that is in hemp farming in about a dozen states across the country. We have Ola Lessard, who is the president of the U.S. Hemp Roundtable and the chief marketing officer for Hemp Fusion, which is a hemp extract and CBD company. And we've got the four presidents of the four leading dietary supplement trade groups, all in one room here, or one virtual room here. We've got Stephen Mister, who is the president of the Council for Responsible Nutrition, Michael McGuffin, who is the president of the American Herbal Products Association, Scott Melville, who is the president of the Consumer Healthcare Products Association, and Loren Israelson, who is the president of the United Natural Products Alliance. We are expecting any moment for Congressman Kurt Schrader to join us as well, who is the lead sponsor of this legislation. But we'll get started in his absence and bring him to the table as soon as he joins us. HR 841 is addressing a real challenge faced by the hemp industry and the CBD industry at the current time. There is a great struggle for hemp farmers who are trying to sell their crops for the purposes of hemp extracts due to the fact that there is currently great regulatory uncertainty since the FDA has not taken action since the 2018 Farm Bill, both explicitly legalized hemp and explicitly legalized hemp's derivatives, extracts, and cannabinoids, which include CBD and other hemp extracts. At the same time, there are thousands of unregulated products on the marketplace, whether they're CBD or now the new Delta 8, that are going to consumers without any regulatory oversight. Many of those products are quite good, but some do not have what they say they have in them, and others could potentially have elements that are injurious to the public health and safety. You'll be hearing all about the details of these issues, as well as how 841 will address them in the coming minutes. But I want to start off with Kyle Truesdale. Again, Kyle is a hemp farmer, has been doing this for the last several years. Actually, we've got Congressman Schrader just joining us. Forgive me, we will get back into order. And so I wanted to start off by introducing the man behind this all, Congressman from Oregon, who has introduced 841 along with 25 other co-sponsors, and give him, with our great thanks and gratitude for his leadership, but want to give him the floor to talk about 841, why he sponsored it, and why he feels it's so important. Congressman?
Thanks, Jonathan. I'm in the middle of God's country as we speak. Just came down off the mountain outside of Silverton, where we had a bunch of forest fires, and volunteer fire department has no service, no cell service, no broadband, no nothing. But there's a growing area of CBD development out this way and all through my Willamette Valley, and opportunity to do it smartly and safely and provide some economic certainty for a lot of these farmers out here and frankly across the country. I got interested in the whole CBD thing. I kind of accidentally had a farming family that good friends with over the years, with some farm bureau with these folks, and their father was getting older and had some serious issues, both from an orthopedic standpoint and some real pain, and tried a bunch of things. The opioids weren't working, and frankly, they were worried about the addictive abilities there. And so they had a cousin that heard a little bit about some of the medicinal effects of some of the cannabinoids, and ended up trying some CBD, and the guy who could barely function or at all was at the breakfast table the next morning chowing down. It was very impressive, and as a result of that, they have diversified their farming operation to include hemp production, and have quite the operation, quite the lab on site. They've plugged into what rudimentary laboratory and regulatory framework there is to try and do it right, safe. Consumers are represented well.
Your volume has gone down.
Because I'm in the middle of nowhere, Jonathan.
Okay.
How about now? Is that any
We
better?
got you now. Yeah, we got you
Right. And welcome to rural Oregon, folks.
now.
So I introduced this bill with Morgan Griffith. Mark's good friend from Virginia, sees the value, his constituents see the value in this too. And it's interesting. Some of my farmers are a little apologetic for wanting the government involved at all, but they understand that without some light touch of regulatory framework, this industry will never get off the ground. It'll never be sanctioned by USDA or anybody else. FDA. It requires at least the standards of dietary supplements to be implemented here to make sure that when they're doing their work, that when that product gets tested, it actually has less than that 0.3% THC in it at the end of the day, and actually has the ability to do what it's supposed to be advertised to do. As you all know, there are a lot of products out there purport to be this, that, and the other thing. Last thing we need is some sort of snake oil moniker on an industry that really could be valuable, not just to the farming community, but consumers out there of disciplines, helping people get by instead of opioids. I mean, the prospects of using CBD is pretty cool, and would really relieve a lot of the addictive issues that we've got out there. So, with that in mind, the goal of the bill is pretty simple. It's a light touch of dietary supplemental regulation, put on the CBD industry, give them an official status, official standing, make sure the laboratories are certified and can do the testing that they're supposed to do to make sure that these products are safe and as delivered to the consumer at the end of the day. So that's really what it's all about. Not that difficult. Again, it covers a lot of different geography from Virginia to Oregon, and all parts in between. So we really enjoy you guys asking questions and hopefully supporting our efforts. This is a nice area of bipartisanship, and I'd argue Washington, D.C. desperately needs some bipartisanship wins right now. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Jonathan and head on down the road.
Congressman, thanks for joining us, and most importantly, thanks for your leadership on this issue. And we feel like we're on a successful route, and you got us there. So thank you for everything.
Thanks for your leadership, Jonathan. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, so we're going to now turn to our experts. If you have any questions for them, please go to the bottom of the Zoom and click Q&A and send us any questions, and we will address them when we can. And if we can't get to them in time, we will address them after you one-on-one. So let's start with Kyle Truesdale. As I mentioned, he is a hemp farmer, has operations in about a dozen states. Kyle, this has been a real challenging year for hemp farmers. If you can kind of share with us what the challenges the hemp farming industry has seen in the past couple of years, and why HR 841 is so important to address them.
Sure. So, I mean, as everybody knows, farming is an extremely difficult profession. We don't see a whole lot of the younger generation wanting to follow in granddad's or dad's footsteps any longer. So, every challenge, farmers are faced, you could just imagine there's an infinite amount. I mean, Mother Nature being one of the most difficult, but farmers are resilient and can figure out ways to, overcome those challenges. Specifically in the last couple of years for hemp farmers, genetics has been a tough, challenge for them to face. The actual farming practices to support those genetics, and specifically for hemp, there's years of university data for every other crop out there on the planet. Information on fertilization, IPM programs and whatnot, but hemp still does not have that maturity within the cultural practices. So, it's been difficult for farmers to be able to actually successfully farm the crop from a break-even standpoint. And, we throw in the other challenges from the regulatory side, specifically for the downstream and maturity of the supply chain. That's the most difficult piece. We were able to, understand the crop well enough. We did a lot of work in Oregon for over the last 8 years to, get those foundational skill sets developed for farmers to be able to successfully, take this crop from seed all the way to market. But that's where the challenge comes in for the farmers today is they don't have the ability to monetize their crop. They put all the time, energy, labor, resources, and whatnot into farming the crop, and then they don't have anything to do with it. That has been the biggest challenge. We have definitely had a lot of farmers not, break even whatsoever, have lost a lot of money because they were kind of sold this pie in the sky of here's this market, and there's the ability to monetize this crop for a large value. But the issue really, and the reality of it all is the supply chain was not mature, completely fragmented. And that had to do with the fact that the regulatory piece of it, in which what you can do with this end product and where it can go was, not, the dots had not been connected yet. So farmers have been extremely reluctant over the last year and a half to go back into farming hemp because they lost millions of dollars. I mean, it's not cheap to farm. Any state you're in, it's still not cheap to farm. Inputs are expensive. The ground's expensive. Water's expensive. Every bit of it goes into the equation of which they have to look at when they're looking at their farming budget to understand whether I should do this crop or not. They're all looking at these markets, but hemp has this ability from so many fronts to bring them value. And I think we all understand what that value can be if we have the regulations in place for the downstream production of the end product to the consumer, for them to monetize it and it flows back to the farmer. That's extremely important for them right now because the demand's out there. Consumers want it. We understand, I've heard a lot of the benefits. Congressman Schrader mentioned those. I mean, from the health standpoint of the ability to, potentially have some effect on the opioid epidemic in the United States. That's huge. It's extremely huge. And that in turn would then give the farmers the ability to, okay, this is a viable crop. This is something we can farm and we can do well. We can put food on the table. At the end of the day, farmers are hard workers. They're extremely trustworthy, honest, and down to earth. And as this matures and it's gone from this niche market into an industrialized commercial crop, you're going to see more farmers that are traditional in nature are going to switch up and are going to start farming hemp, but they need a place to be able to monetize their crop. And if there is no connection and the regulatory piece to be able to allow for the consumers to purchase something that they trust, then farmers aren't going to get involved. But this is the ability to do that.
And again, if any of you have questions for Kyle or any of our panelists, please go to the Q&A section and type them, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. We'll move on next to Ola Lessard, who is the president of the U.S. Hemp Roundtable. She's also the chief marketing officer for Hemp Fusion, which is a CBD company with products sold across the country. She's also doing a little double duty. We originally were scheduled to have Amber Littlejohn, who is the executive director of the Minority Cannabis Business Association. Unfortunately, she had a little family emergency that's being resolved, but was unable to join us. And so let me ask you two related questions, Ola. First of all, we just learned from Kyle the hardships on the farming industry. What are the hardships on the CBD businesses such as yourself, and particularly how is this climate injured farmers of color and minority-owned businesses, and how can HR 841 fix all of that?
Wow. Well, Amber's shoes are very big to fill, so I will let me maybe start with that question. and then I can move on to sort of, manufacturers, CBD businesses, and consumers, I think is, the other thing I really want to talk about. So, Congressman Schrader made an excellent point in that, without some regulation, this is a challenging industry for everybody. And unregulated products are a problem for everybody, for all of the reasons we know about. We regulate things to make sure that there's an adherence to standards and safety and all that good stuff. But we also know that minority consumers, farmers and business owners are disproportionately affected when we don't have properly regulated products and markets. Minority consumers are more often the target of consumer scams and are disproportionately the victims of unregulated products. And that's problematic, but HR 841 provides a lot of those consumer protections we're talking about. I mean, that is the very purpose of this, is to ensure that we, that these products have clear guidelines, that people know what they are, and that we all have to adhere to them as manufacturers, which is in itself consumer protection. So, by ensuring those consumer protections for everybody, we actually have a even greater protection for minority communities, minority consumers who, again, are disproportionately affected in that way. Minority farmers, I mean, you just heard from Kyle about the struggles of hemp farmers. And, I think this is especially apparent when you consider farmers of color who have been historically left out of this important and emerging industry. There's a lot of great farming to be done in hemp. And as Kyle said, that can't happen until we open up the consumer market more effectively. And that's what this is all about again. And then minority business owners. We know that we have systemic racism, and that has kept minority communities of all types out of, business ownership, access to capital, access to guidance and knowledge. And a more regulated industry will, better allow that. So again, 841, I think, is very important in terms of providing those opportunities for business owners. I mean, the whole purpose of the U.S. Hemp Roundtable is to bring together a coalition of businesses who support one another, who provide insights, who, it's a rising tide raises all ships. And, we as an organization, as the Roundtable, have decided to really focus on minority empowerment as one of our key initiatives. We're holding ourselves accountable. We're holding our member companies accountable. And we're trying very hard to help bring everybody under this tent of opportunity that we see moving forward. So, again, this mission of ours really educates our support for 841. We believe this legislation is important for creating equity for all farmers, business owners, and consumers. And we know that will also have an incredibly positive effect for minority business owners, farmers, and consumers. So I know that Amber probably would have given you much greater detail, and she's incredibly articulate on this topic. But I do want to say that as an organization, we see this as really important, and we want to make sure that we're highly in support of this piece of legislation for many reasons, but that's one of them. Speaking to sort of consumers and CBD companies, I guess what I want to say is that not having clear direction on CBD from the federal government has had a number of negative implications. And I'm just going to focus on two of them for the sake of brevity. The impact to retailers, both large and small, and sort of the downstream economic impact of that. And the fact that we've created a patchwork of state laws that are confusing to consumers and also, frankly, make it harder for compliant companies to thrive. So you have, our very small retailers. We have a lot of independent health food retailers across this country. Many of us sell in those stores, or, our company sells in about 4,000 small independently owned retail establishments. And these guys are just trying to navigate, what's legal in their state, what's legal in their municipality, what's legal nationally. And frankly, they're terrified. They hear these stories about, small businesses being raided and it being announced that they're selling marijuana when in fact they're selling legal hemp-derived CBD. And these small businesses can't afford the loss of income, but more importantly, they can't afford the loss of trust. These are small local businesses. They live and work in these communities, and it's hard to get trust back in communities, where you've been accused of breaking a law when you haven't. So that's really the bind that small retailers are in. Large retailers they're more risk averse in general. And so for the most part, they've just stayed out of CBD altogether. And, you know, the $22 billion industry for CBD that many of us heard about for years. And, you know, this is the market that Kyle's talking about, where farmers will have the ability to sell into. That's not going to happen until these large retailers jump in. And they're not going to jump in until there is clear, defined regulation from the federal government. That's just the bottom line. They're going to wait. And until they're comfortable selling, that market that everybody, you know, all of that supply chain is dependent upon is frankly not going to happen. And that's a pity, because large retailers, you know, they stimulate the economy, they create jobs, they create that demand for everyone up and down that supply chain, from the farmers to processors to trucking companies to manufacturers who are employing people. So all of us really need that to happen. And it's not going to happen if we don't have clarity from the federal government. So I just want to talk really quickly about the sort of what's happened with this patchwork of state laws. You know, in the void of federal guidance, states have done their best to come up with their own laws, and some of them have done a spectacular job, and some of them have, you know, a deeper knowledge of hemp and these products, and some of them have really struggled. And, you know, as manufacturers, you know, we've sort of faced the fallout, because all these states have different laws. And look, I'm a chief marketing officer. I'm in charge of packaging. So, you know, I look at these little guys. These are two of our products. They're tiny. This label is 1.25 inches tall by about 2.5 inches wide. And as a manufacturer, I have a lot of laws that I have to follow as to what goes on that supplement label. There's supplement facts and ingredients and country of origin and the net weight and fill and directions for how to use it. And of course, I want to encourage folks to, you know, check with their healthcare providers before they take any kind of supplement, or if they're pregnant or nursing. And I need to put information on there for people who might have allergies to dairy or soy or gluten or nuts. And that's my regular stuff. And now the challenge comes in, and all of these states have created their own bits of legislation and requirements for us. So, you know, I have states that require me to add a QR code. And I have a very specific and kind of lengthy statement about THC that's just for the state of Florida, and another one for the state of California. And the irony to me is the company that I work for, most of our products actually have non-detectable levels of THC, but I have to find room for 2 THC statements. You know, and it's not so much about my challenge in doing that job. The challenge is that is very confusing for consumers. And here I'm with a company that really wants to do things right. We're a highly compliant company, so we're going to follow all of those rules. We're going to jam all of that stuff on our labels. And that means that the font is tiny, and I have a lot of scary warnings on there. And if I have a competitor, you know, Joe's CBD, who made this in his bathtub last week, he's not going to follow any of those rules. And unfortunately, the way we are right now, because the lack of regulation exists federally, it makes it easy for kind of the fly-by-night, non-regulatory compliance companies to thrive. They're going to get away with it. And if those guys get busted, they're going to go under, and they're going to pop up under a new name in a few weeks. And those of us that are trying to build real companies that are lasting, we're going to comply. And the consumer doesn't understand that. So, you know, you see this guy's label and it's got no warnings and it's clean and it's easy to read. And you see mine that's loaded with scary stuff. I think a lot of consumers are going to be tempted to buy this product, not realizing that actually this is the one that's not following the rules and this is the one that is. And so that creates a lot of confusion for consumers. They don't know what my rules are that I have to follow as a manufacturer. And how do they know what's legal? How do they know what's safe? The way things are right now makes it easier for the bad guys to thrive, and it makes it harder for the good companies to thrive. So, you know, I guess I just want to close in saying I'm very privileged to sit on the U.S. Hemp Roundtable with many of my competitors who are equally concerned about doing things correctly, about creating safe products, about being legal. And we're asking you to do something that you probably don't hear very often. Please regulate us. You know, please regulate us fairly. Please regulate us based on science, not on misinformation or, you know, decades of historical bias against a plant. But please regulate us. And you know, on behalf of the roundtable and the companies like ours, you know, I would just say, please pass fair, reasonable legislation. HR 41 is that legislation. It will allow good companies to make safe products that benefit farmers like Kyle, benefit processors, manufacturers, retailers, and most importantly, consumers. And we're very anxious to work with you to do that. And we appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ola. we're now headed towards what the baseball fans would call the murderer's row of superstar dietary supplement leaders. And each one of them is going to take a different angle on this issue. But we'll start off with Stephen Mister, who is the president of the Council Responsible Nutrition. Stephen, if you could kind of start off by helping the folks understand, what this legislation actually does, why it is necessary to create this regulatory environment. What's the framework that we're kind of running into here?
Sure, thanks. And just wow to Ola. I mean, she makes such an articulate and eloquent case for why we have to do something, why the status quo isn't working. So you've asked me to address, what is it exactly, get into the nuts and bolts of how 841 will work within this larger context of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And so it's important to understand what it does and then how that fits into this larger scheme. So HR 841 takes a very simple approach of basically creating an exception to the definition of a dietary supplement. And we refer to that as section 321 FF. That's where you would go to find the definition of a dietary supplement. It lists various things that can be supplements, and one of those would be an herb or botanical or a constituent of an herb or botanical. So, you're looking at that thinking, well, that sounds exactly like a constituent of hemp, CBD, or other cannabinoids, lands squarely within that definition. But then you get to the end of that provision, and it's actually section FF3B for the people who want to follow along at home. And it creates an exception and says, even if you meet the other part of the definition to be a dietary ingredient, you're prevented or precluded from being a dietary ingredient if that article was already approved as a new drug, or if it was already authorized for investigation as a new drug in some kind of clinical investigations that have been published and been made public. And that's the rub, is that the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, in its definitions, creates essentially a race to market for any article. If the dietary supplement gets there first, then you can also commercialize a drug, and the two categories would share the use of that article. So you could have a supplement, and you could also have a drug at the same time. But the way this provision is set up, if the drug gets there first, either by virtue of having been approved as a drug or having been subject to this clinical investigation, then the drug gets the monopoly over the article. And that's the situation we find ourselves in today. So how did we get here? Well, now we have to look back to the Farm Bill. The reason we're in this situation is because prior to the Farm Bill in 2018, CBD and these other cannabinoids that are in hemp were considered a controlled substance. They were on the controlled substance schedule right there along with marijuana until the Farm Bill took them off. So it was impossible for the dietary supplement industry to lawfully market these cannabinoids like CBD in a dietary supplement. And so if we just think about this metaphor of there being a race to market, and we think of it as a foot race, it was like the dietary supplement industry had its shoelaces tied together because we couldn't get to market, but the drug side of the industry was certainly free to investigate and commercialize CBD and other cannabinoids because they were not hampered by the Controlled Substance Act. And that really gets us to why we need 841, because it creates this exception to the general rule and says, in this case, even if the drug got to the finish line first, we're going to allow these two categories to share the marketplace. And I think what's really important here is you'll notice that we haven't talked about safety, because this legal obstacle is not a safety issue. It's an economic one. It's a provision that was set up in the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act to preserve economic incentives for the development of new drugs. It has nothing to do with safety, because if it were a safety argument, there would be a bright line wall and you were either a supplement or a drug and never both. But the law does contemplate that you can have both because it creates the race to market. So 841 does simply two things. First of all, it removes that exclusion and says, notwithstanding 321 FF, we are going to allow CBD and these other hemp-derived cannabinoids to be considered dietary ingredients. And then the second thing it does is it says that once we've done that, those products must be subject to all of the other requirements that would apply to a dietary supplement. And that includes the safety provisions. So safety does come back into the mix once we clear the legal obstacle. And of course, these products would have to go through a new dietary ingredient notification. They would have to be subject to all of our labeling requirements. They'd have to have a supplement facts box. They'd be subject to all of the GMP requirements that all supplements are subject to. They'd be subject to our mandatory adverse event reporting. All of those things immediately kick in to the industry if we can just get past the legal argument. And that's why 841 is so quick and so simple. It takes the products out of this race to market, and then it requires that they obey all the rules for a dietary supplement.
Terrific. Affirmative, Stephen. We'll now move on to Michael McGuffin, who is the president of the American Herbal Products Association. Michael, when the Farm Bill passed, the same day, the FDA announced it was going to explore a pathway towards regulating CBD. 2.5 years later, they're still exploring the pathway. What does this mean? Comment on how the status quo affects things and why 841 is needed in this context.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, for the opportunity to be here. And yes, I've been with the American Herbal Products Association for over 20 years, and we formed a cannabis committee in 2010. So we have been paying attention to this for quite a while. But so when we look at the FDA's inaction since the Farm Bill was passed, I want to start with FDA on a very regular basis in public fora restates its 3 strategic priorities for dietary supplements as 1, consumer safety, 2, product quality, and 3, informed consumer access. We all support all of those priorities, and the current regulatory framework for all dietary supplements ensures that these priorities can be met. I'm going to make some of the same points that Steve just made. In the 2.5 years since the passage of the Farm Bill, there's been very limited enforcement of hemp and CBD products, even as there are estimated to be thousands of such products in the market. Enforcement has been limited almost entirely to action against products that make what I like to call stupid drug claims, that the product will cure a disease, and very, very occasionally for failure to meet label claims. What HR 841 would do promptly is establish with perfect clarity that any company that wants to sell dietary supplements that contain CBD would need to meet all of the regulatory mandates required for every other dietary supplement marketer. The very basic food facility registration requirement that's been in place since 2002, that products must be manufactured to meet the strict CGMP regulation that's been in place for supplements since 2007, that companies would need to identify and submit to FDA any reports they receive of serious adverse events associated with their products. And that's not proven to be caused by their products. If the phone rings, the customer says, "I think your product hurt me," we have an obligation to inform the FDA if it meets the definition of serious. The products have to meet all labeling requirements and claims restrictions. And most importantly, all such companies should expect that FDA will be actively enforcing all of these rules. So as Ola said, her company's already doing all of these things. But because FDA is not showing up to conduct CGMP inspections, not looking at consumer complaint records, not even evaluating if you're registered as a food facility, might even look askance if you do try to register the food facility, there's an uneven playing field, and there's a proliferation of products that are, in a sense, counting on the fact that nobody is enforcing. In a phrase, when it comes to dietary supplements, hemp is just another herb, CBD is just another botanical constituent. HR 841 would ensure that hemp and CBD are regulated like every other botanical ingredient when sold as a dietary supplement. And that's what is needed to ensure that FDA's own 3 strategic priorities are accomplished. To make it a little more personal, Congressman Schrader told us about experiences of people in his community who are already using CBD products. HR 841 would make sure that those products that his constituents are using are well regulated. One final comment as a follow-up to Ola's mention of all of the state regulations. Once there's an established federal standard per 841, that should completely resolve the consumer confusion that she mentioned that's been created by different state by state rules. And we would have clear rules for interstate commerce. And that's what we need for these botanical ingredients.
Terrific. Very, very helpful. Melville is the president of the Consumer Healthcare Products Association. I want to kind of focus on the word consumer. We've talked a bit about CBD and other hemp extract consumers. What is the challenge for them right now with this lack of clarity, and what would be beneficial to them through 841?
And thanks to the Hemp Roundtable and Representative Schrader for the invitation to participate here today. As Jonathan mentioned, CHPA represents manufacturers and marketers of consumer healthcare products, over-the-counter drugs, dietary supplements, and consumer medical devices. And for many years, there has been a strong consumer and commercial interest in CBD and hemp-derived products, in foods, in cosmetics, in dietary supplements, and in pharmaceuticals. Yet, given FDA's current interpretation of the Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act, dietary supplements cannot legally be brought to the market if they contain CBD. Now, in 2019, our association submitted a citizens petition, urging FDA to exercise its statutory authority to issue regulations establishing a clear regulatory pathway for manufacturers to lawfully market dietary supplements containing CBD. Steve talked about that legal authority that they have been unwilling to use. Such a pathway would put in place the necessary safeguards to protect public health, while also giving firms a mechanism to provide safety data, all the things that Michael referenced that would treat dietary supplements containing CBD just like any other dietary supplement and apply the same rules to them. Unfortunately, FDA has not acted on CHPA's citizens petition, and as a result, there is no legal pathway for launch of CBD or other hemp-derived ingredients as dietary supplements. And this ongoing lack of regulatory clarity is keeping responsible consumer products companies like the ones that CHPA represents on the sideline, while public safety is threatened by unscrupulous manufacturers, the kind that Ola was talking about, who will make product in a bathtub, not label correctly, and consumers are spending lots of money, and may even be hurting themselves by the products that they're taking. In fact, a 2020 FDA report found that less than half of the products they tested contained the amount of CBD on the label. They also found that THC levels in the numbers were far above, in some cases, the legal limit of 0.3% of weight. And that's why CHPA supports HR 841, because the legislation, if enacted into law, will clarify the regulatory status of dietary supplements containing CBD and allow responsible companies to move forward under the rules established by FDA and like other dietary supplements are regulated by. And if this legislation is not enacted and the FDA continues to view these products as illegal under the FD&C Act, then I'm afraid consumers will continue to be at risk with shoddy, suboptimal, dangerous, and illegal products coming to the market. So I appreciate the opportunity to come here and join today and provide this perspective, and I look forward to answering any questions that we might have.
Thanks so much, Scott. Our last panelist is Loren Israelson, who is the president of the United Natural Products Alliance. Loren, we've heard mention of DSHEA, and DSHEA is the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act of 1994. 27 years ago, when that historic legislation was passed, you were in the room, or at least very close to where the amendments and the language were drafted. Can you share your perspective on the DSHEA debate 27 years ago now, and the context we're in with CBD and with HR 841.
Thank you as well for the invitation. I'm always glad to be with my colleagues. We spent a lot of time together discussing these and other issues that affect supplements. And at the moment, the hemp CBD issues are foremost on our minds. Just a bit of brief background. I've been in the supplement industry for 40 years. And in the early 1990s, formed the United Natural Products Alliance for the express purpose of dealing with the very same problem that we're faced with hemp CBD today. At that early pre-92 period, there was no lawful status for what we now know as dietary supplements, a $55 billion category. It seems hard to imagine as we look back, but the FDA treated today commonly sold, very widely used dietary supplements as new drugs, as food additives, and we're trying to force them off the market. After multiple meetings and negotiations with FDA, they were not in a mood nor interested to help find a pathway to create a lawful status for dietary supplements. So when DSHEA was introduced in 1992 by Senator Orrin Hatch, who has been a great supporter and champion of our industry for many years until his retirement, he took this issue on because it was a consumer issue. He was a true believer, a true user. We find ourselves in the same situation today, that the Battle of DSHEA was remarkable. It generated more constituent contacts to Congress than anything other than the Vietnam War. This is overwhelming to members of Congress. They had never seen such a political uprising of consumers that were calling, sending faxes, showing up at town hall meetings. It really was unparalleled. I believe that we're seeing, or will shortly see, now that we have concrete legislation pending in Congress, a consumer that will rise up and once again say to Congress, we're asking you to create a lawful pathway for this botanical. As Michael said, hemp is no different than any other botanical that is regulated as a dietary ingredient, but for what Steve explained to you, this unusual problem that it was a controlled substance during the period of time that we would otherwise have gone through our usual regulatory procedures to clear to the marketplace. So this created this very unusual problem that could really only be remedied in one way, and that is simply to use the apparatus of DSHEA, which was custom built for this kind of problem. And we need to use it promptly. As has been pointed out, and I will reaffirm, is that in the absence of a proper regulatory statutory structure for this terrific category of products, it will remain a gray and ultimately a black market. Without proper regulation, without proper oversight, the quality systems that are particularly important for this class of products. Farmers need incentives. You have heard Kyle speak to that very clearly. Unless they can see a clear regulatory pathway, they cannot see a pathway to commercial success. It is in the hands of Congress to make this decision. And as Congressman Schrader said, and we fully support his legislation, this is a simple bill. This is a straightforward fix. The underlying infrastructure of DSHEA was debated and built almost 30 years ago. FDA does have the opportunity to redress this issue administratively, but as you have heard, they have had nearly 3 years and we don't see any action pending from FDA. This means that in order for consumers to really have the quality and access that they demand and they've been asking for, Congress needs to act. This is a bipartisan issue. We have a statutory framework that exists perfectly designed to resolve this question. So we seek your help and support. And I imagine many of you listening in as staff members were not on scene when DSHEA was passed. But I can only tell you that you had to be there to appreciate what a remarkable dynamic time this was. And the passion and the energy that was shown by consumers and constituents was remarkable, something that I have not seen since DSHEA, but I certainly hope to see again soon as it comes to this hemp CBD legislation. And you can certainly count on us to be advisors, supporters. And our role is to help create and support a lawful, high quality, safe, and productive hemp and CBD category. So with that, again, thank you to Jonathan, fellow panel members. I'm happy to take questions should there be any.
We have about 12 minutes left for questions. If you have them, please type them in the Q&A section and we'll address them. Our first question is about Delta-8 THC. How does this legislation affect Delta-8 THC? Let me kind of introduce this subject for those who might be less familiar. In recent months, there has been a tremendous rise in the sale of a compound that's known as Delta-8 THC. We had been more familiar with its cousin, Delta-9 THC, which is the intoxicant that you normally associate with a product like cannabis, marijuana. When the Farm Bill was written, it specifically defined hemp to include only products that have extracts and plants that have less than 0.3% Delta-9 THC on a dry weight basis. It did not address Delta-8. Delta-8 has risen in recent months as a product that has been marketed by some for its intoxicating values. Many people do say it gets you high. It's a different kind of high than Delta-9, but still it's a high. And you see these products emerging unregulated in places like gas stations and in vape shops across the country. The argument for its legality is that since Congress only mentioned Delta-9, then Delta-8 should be legal. By contrast, some will argue that some of the regulations of the DEA make Delta-8 illegal, but it's clearly from a spirit of the law sense, it certainly was not what Congress intended. When Congress passed the Farm Bill, it intended to distinguish hemp and marijuana as between those products that are intoxicating and those that are not intoxicating. So back to the question, what does this bill do about it? I want to talk about it in two contexts. First of all, I'd like to ask Kyle. We have seen a lot of farmers turn to Delta-8 because they've been having trouble selling CBD their crops for CBD given this regulatory uncertainty. If you could elaborate on that and why unleashing the CBD market would possibly deter or at least put a lid on some of this Delta-8 growth.
Sure, you're absolutely right, Jonathan. There's been a huge surge in farmers moving in that direction. And for one simple reason, it's a way to monetize your crop. There is a market for it and consumers are buying it. I mean, you see it everywhere, as you said. So to be able to look at the farm base that is, again, the traditional farmers that have been multi-generations, fifth and sixth generation farmers in the United States that want to follow and comply and, be, a part of an industry that has regulation around it that is meaningful and is specific. There's got to be the ability to, have an alternative, basically. And right now, the Delta-8, yeah, it's definitely out there. A lot of people moving towards it. And from my experience, the farmers that are participating in that are not the farmers that are going to be here in the next generation and in the following generation. They are, again, some of the fly-by-night people that are just trying to make a quick buck. And that is not what's going to help this industry. It's not what's going to make it sustainable and take it into the future.
And for that reason, the U.S. Hemp Roundtable has issued its position that products that should not be marketed under the guise of hemp for their intoxicating value and intoxicating products should be treated separately. It doesn't mean they should all be illegal, but they should be treated akin to adult use cannabis, marijuana in dispensaries, et cetera. And that's where we see Delta-8 ultimately being treated. But I want to turn this over. I also should mention that U.S. Hemp Authority, which is the industry self-regulating organization, has prohibited any Delta-8 products from being certified. The certificate to U.S. Hemp Authority is a signal to consumers that the products are meeting quality and safety and technical guidelines, and Delta-8 does not fit those for the reasons we've discussed. But I want to ask, and please feel free, you all, to pop up, but 841 and its relation to Delta-8, how would, allow, Stephen, I see you raise your hand, how would 841 kind of affect this whole discussion? Stephen, you're on mute, sorry.
We certainly agree with everything that you have said, and we're not looking to see Delta 8 products come into the dietary supplement marketplace. We think 841 can be addressed if we need to deal with that. But even if 841 were passed exactly as it's written today, we believe that FDA could easily keep Delta 8 products off of the market. Because as I said, the second half of 841 says that all of the other requirements for the dietary supplement market would come down like a shield over that marketplace, and everything would apply. These products would have to go through a new dietary ingredient notification. Nobody is suggesting that Delta 8 was in the market as a supplement prior to 1994. And the companies would have an obligation to show FDA that that product is reasonably expected to be safe. And we know, given the profile of Delta 8 and its potential intoxicant and potential addictiveness, it would be very easy for FDA to argue that the companies have not met that requirement to show a reasonable expectation of safety, and they could simply declare it as an adulterated ingredient. So
Great.
even as it's written, I think that the consumer would be protected.
Terrific. Michael, you want to add something?
Yeah, another reason to support that, and I'm making a point for me and Ola, 5 states have made Delta 8 illegal. So we have an imbalanced and non-consistent rule throughout the country. We want there to be a consistent rule so that we know exactly whether we are or are not allowed to market this. Our association has a policy quite similar to yours. And I only point that out to say U.S. Hemp Roundtable is not unique in this. The industry, you just heard Steve say it, we all are taking positions to say you can't market that as hemp. It's not hemp. So I think, again, it points out the value of 841. We get this handled at a federal level, and then we don't have to go battle in 50 states.
Michael makes a real good point. I also want to stress on a more universal basis, which is we have on this forum 4 leading dietary supplement organizations. They in some ways might be considered competitors, but they're all rowing the same direction. They're all supportive of this effort, and they all are strongly united behind this. The same is true of the hemp industry. We've got dozens of trade associations in the hemp industry, as you can imagine, both national and regional and local. And again, we are united behind this bill. There certainly are some outliers. I don't want to say it's unanimous by any means, but it certainly is the consensus of the hemp and dietary supplement industries that this bill is the best course to move forward. Speaking of moving forward, the next question asks what are the prospects for passage of this in the current Congress. I want to kind of talk about this as well as the Senate bill that was just introduced last week. We've been talking today about HR 841, which was introduced by Congressman Schrader, 25 co-sponsors. Of the complete co-sponsor list, 16 are Democrats, 10 are Republicans. Again, a very rare bipartisan agreement about this. We are hopeful. We are anticipating that the Energy and Commerce Committee will hold a hearing sometime soon on this issue. We've spoken with staff and with the chairman about that, and are real hopeful to see that. But given the strong support across the aisles, we are really hopeful to see some real movement on that through the committee. Initially, these efforts had been waged, just like the Farm Bill, on adding some language to a big piece of legislation and letting that legislation dictate things. We went through this differently. We've gone through regular order and have identified 2 Energy and Commerce Committee congressmen to introduce this, bringing it through that committee for hearings, and that is the way that much of Washington establishment would like to see things happen, and that's the way that we're following it. I do want to mention also on the Senate side, Senator Ron Wyden, with the bipartisan support of Senator Rand Paul and Senator Jeff Merkley, introduced S1698, which is a very similar bill. The difference between that bill and the Senate bill and the House bill is the Senate bill also allows for a pathway for the sale of CBD as a food and beverage additive. This bill in the House is limited to dietary supplements. This is a decision that was waged for not because anybody objects to food and beverage, but it was felt that the pathway would be smoother for a dietary supplement bill only in the House. Again, I'd like to turn this over to any of the panelists if they have any additional thoughts about this. Michael.
You know, my crystal ball is no good, but I agree that we have every reason to be optimistic in that this has progressed more than any other legislative attempt to date. And then I just want to make a quick comment on that Senate bill, make the same point Steve Mister made earlier. It will maintain the pre-market safety requirements even as there's a regulatory pathway established for CBD in foods and beverage. It will not create a Wild West. It will address the Wild West that already exists.
Terrific. Any other comments?
Yeah, I just add that, you know, we are at a stalemate right now. FDA has made its decision. They're not going to allow these products to market. We disagree with that decision. And really, if Congress doesn't act, I think this untenable situation, putting consumers at risk, will continue indefinitely.
And if I can, we're concerned that FDA is to some degree holding hemp hostage, holding CBD hostage to, we're not quite sure what the ransom is. We're not quite sure what it is that it wants, but we don't think it's as straightforward as we've got concerns about some safety issues. Again, the current regulatory framework addresses safety issues, places the burden on the marketer. So there is a concern that we would all prefer, I think this is true for all of us, we would prefer that FDA exercise its existing authority and create these regulatory pathways on its own. Right now, we need the US Congress to help us though, because in 2.5 years, FDA has not done so. We understand they were pretty busy in 2020 with some other priorities, but still, we really need to get this done. It protects consumers, it protects the industry, it supports farmers, and it really is just a broad base community that needs this to get resolved.
Terrific. So let us close there, which is if you are a congressional staffer watching this briefing, whether live or on tape, we do encourage you to talk to your boss. We would love to have him or her join the 26 co-sponsors that are co-sponsoring 841. You just need to get in touch with Kelly Nickel in Congressman Schrader's office and let her know that you'd like your boss to go on the bill. Or if you leave with any further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, to Kelly. I'll put you in touch with any of the folks on this call, and we would appreciate your support. Lastly, I know there's some folks watching a video of this that are supporters of the bill and want to figure out ways that they can get their congressman or congresswoman to support it. Go to hempsupporter.com. We've got a portal, online portal that allows you to send messages directly to your members of Congress, both in the House, on this House bill, as well as on the Senate bill, to urge them to co-sponsor these important pieces of legislation. That's hempsupporter.com, and together we can make sure that our farmers are protected and our consumers are safe for these wonderful products going forward. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to working with you in the months ahead.